Hello, welcome back to my tech farm. I'm Igor, and in this video I want to present you the Sovol SV06 Plus 3D printer, and this box is sent to me by the Sovol company in exchange for a review. Now, a few months ago I presented Sovol SV06 printer, and I think it's one of the best some kind of Prusa clones, but for really small fraction of the price. Okay, interesting thing about this printer is that it can prove that the price of the Prusa MK3S is a little bit overpriced. I understand that the research was very expensive, but the research paid off at least 2 years ago, so it can be much cheaper, and Sovol SV06 is great proof for this. Similarity with the Prusa, basically it uses a very similar motion system, similar plastic parts, only on Sovol they are injection molded, and both are able to print on temperatures up to 300 degrees Celsius. I did a very detailed comparison between the Sovol SV06, Prusa Mark 3S and ND3 S1 Pro. You can find the link down in the description. About SV06 Plus, it is very similar to 06, but it has much bigger volume, 300 and 300 mm in X and Y direction and 340 mm in Z direction. It has a dual Z-axis, planetary dual gear direct drive extruder, and it is also able to print on 300 degrees Celsius. It has auto leveling sensor, and also it has the filament runout sensor, which was missing in the SV06, and I think this was the biggest weakness of the SV06 compared to the Prusa, for example. And also it has a touch screen, and it is able to print up to 150 mm per second speed. We will see this. And of course, because of this bigger volume, it needs more power for the heating of the bed mostly, and it has 500 watts power supply unit. But let's see what's in the box, and we will analyze it a little bit later. This is just a time-lapse video of unboxing. Everything is nicely protected in this black foam, and it will not be damaged during the shipping. This was content of the box, and similar like SV06, this is almost a completely assembled printer. So this is the base with the print surface, the power supply unit, user manual, and this is that gantry which is almost completely assembled. This is the planetary gear extruder, screen and the screen holder, 200 grams PLA sample filaments which is on the spool. This is the spool holder, and here we have the filament runout sensor, and some tools and balls for the assembling. And between tools we have the pliers, and it is good to see that we have finally a metallic tweezers. I always recommend this to the manufacturers, but very rare that I can see this tool is included. Oh, and they use a little bit bigger nozzle. 500 watts and output is 24 volts, and also don't forget to check the voltage is it set correctly for your country. Planetary gear extruder, and outside it looks very similar like the previous one, only I already noticed that the hot end is bigger and it used the bigger nozzle too. First step of assembling is installing the gantry to the base with 2 bolts from the side. The next is installing the spool holder, and this is the rotating spool holder actually. Then installing the power supply unit with 2 bolts from the back side. And then the mainboard unit box. For this we don't even need the tools or bolts. And this is the screen holder attached with 3 bolts. And this is the screen. And the last step is connecting the wires. Cables on the right side, the Z-axis, the power supply unit and the screen. And cables on the left side, the Z-axis, filament runout sensor, X-axis motor, and the hot end extruder cables. During assembling I noticed few additional things, so I already mentioned the filament runout sensor, and this spool holder is rotating. Don't search for limit switches because it uses the sensorless homing like Prusa, and I noticed that rods on all 3 axes are now 10 mm in diameter and not 8. And nice thing, they use now these bolts, and the plate is notched, so it is very easy to place it in the correct position. And now actually we can use these grid lines. I noticed the belt is a little bit loose, but it is very easy to add a little bit more tension with this rotating wheel. And same with the x-axis. Okay. I can see they still use the smaller TF card and it is on a little bit less comfortable position. But a bigger issue or possible problem I can see with this cable here. It looks okay so far, but I can see a possible problem here if this bed has to move, I know, 1000 times during the one printing. There is a small chance that this cable will stuck or here, or it will be clinched here. Maybe some kind of holder will help to prevent this. One more time, you should check the voltage on the back side, is it set correctly for your country, and I can turn it on. The wooding is fast, nice colors. So far it is quiet, but we will see later when all fans are working. And always the first thing is to check the moving of the axis. Don't forget, before the first homing you can only move the axis to the positive values and not to the negative. Axes are moving correctly and can start the leveling process now. The leveling should be easy because we don't have to do the manual leveling. The position of the build surface is fixed, where there are no springs and the leveling knobs. And now I can see that we have nice thermal insulation on the heat plate. Now let's start the leveling process and the machine will first do the homing. And now we have these options. Here I can set the Z offset, distance between the nozzle and the build surface, using that paper and the friction. And here I can do the Z align, which is mechanical, and I will talk about this later. And this is the auto leveling, when it will touch several points on the surface, record that offset mesh, and it will be used to compensate during the printing if there is any inaccuracy in the surface. Auto Z align, it will press the X gently to the top of the frame with a low current, and after this it will become horizontal. And then I'm setting the Z offset, and here I'm using 2 pieces of paper to have bigger distance just in case for the first attempt. And then auto leveling is preheating the nozzle and the bed surface, and it will create some kind of offset mesh. If there is any inaccuracy in surface, it will be compensated during the printing. What I'm missing here is the possibility to quick check the need for this mechanical auto Z align, because we don't want to do it too often. And it would be great if this checking could be added into Start G-code, and we could have some quick checking before every printing, like we have similar on the Prusa. But 2 points checking should be enough. Because if separates are not powered, we can accidentally move one side of the gantry and it will not be horizontal anymore. Now I can heat it up and insert the filament, and I am curious to see how easy it is to inserting, because with SV06 I notice I have to straighten up a little bit this part. So the filament runout sensor into extruder, and I noticed that it still needs some practicing in which direction I have to cut that 45-degree angle on the end of the filament. But it's in and it's ready for printing. And now let's print something from the SD card prepared in a factory. It starts really fast, even for the first layer. Let's see what can we see during the printing. I try to follow the current Z coordinate, but these don't refresh correctly, I think, because it was 0.7, then 1.1, and now 1.9. So I'm a little bit confused what exactly is this. If that's the current Z coordinate, it doesn't refresh correctly. Okay, so here we can do the pause the printing, or we can stop it. And here we can set the additional settings. For example, we can modify the Z offset if necessary. We can see during the starting of the printing is too close or too far. We can change the nozzle and the bed temperature. Interesting, they use 185 temperature on the nozzle, which I find a little bit low, but okay. And here we can change the print speed, probably in the percentage, and the fan. This is on the scale between 0 and 255. Maybe it is more logical for the beginner users to have the percentage here too. And here we can start the filament change. This is some footage in a real-time speed, so you can see how fast is this printer. And it could be quiet printer, but I'll notice that most of the noise is from these fast movements. So it looks like the fast printing and low noise cannot go together. This is small brim. The white color is not the best for the camera, but in real life this Benchy looks great. Absolutely no issues with it. All elements are printed correctly. But it's time to prepare my own G-code using the Sovol Cura. It is very easy to add the printer because it's already in the list. And I'm preparing this calibration cube. And here I noticed some bugs in the Sovol Cura. For example, I cannot change the infill. Here you can see I set it to 60%, but it uses the same infill. So another bug I noticed that if I do some search in it and then I want to change the menu, it doesn't work. So definitely I would rather use Ultimaker Cura and add this printer to it. Here I asked my 5-year-old daughter to start this printing. She was get used to the smartphone, so she was really frustrated with this non-capacitive screen where she has to use some force to press the button. Not a big issue, but yeah, definitely younger generation may be frustrated with this. Printing is finished a few seconds ago, and I want to check the bed adhesion, which looks like it is great, and I will wait until the bed cools down. The bed cooled down. This calibration cube looks okay, good quality of the surfaces, no ghosting, even if it was printed on a little bit higher speeds. I measured that the dimensions are correct, but definitely this is the last calibration cube I am using in this channel, because I'm moving to this dice type of the calibration cube. You can download it from the Printables link in the description. It's time for some longer printing. Also, this object uses almost the whole y-axis. My daughter always asks a toilet for her Barbies. It's still printing the first layer, but here it says 5mm on the Z, so a little bit confusing. I think this part needs a little bit update in the firmware. Now it switched to 0.3mm, but actually this is the second layer on 0.6mm. And also I can see the estimate printing time is very inaccurate. I hope it will be corrected later. Printing at 50% and 3 more hours of printing. Printed in 6 hours and 11 minutes. Oh, it's already removed. But the toilet set must be complete. And only now it's finished. Let's measure the bed heat up time and compare to the other printers. And this will become a regular testing method, so I will set only the bed temperature to 100 degrees Celsius, and I'm following the time when it will reach the given temperature, and this can be downloaded from my website. 11 minutes for 100 degrees Celsius. I think this is a little bit slow, but you can check on my website, there is a comparison table. This test print is in spiral or vase mode, which I always like to test now with the new printers, because of that powerless sound function. Some printers have a problem during the recording of the position. The moving of the nozzle makes a small break, and it results a small oozing of the nozzle and small spot on the object. But it is good to see that here everything is okay with this spiral vase mode printing method. And this object has very nice and smooth surfaces. There are small minimal breaks in the printing, but that's the result of the decoration, but everything is okay here. And now it's time to print something on higher temperatures. I have in progress testing of this PCTG, and I will need some test subjects for the layer adhesion, and I will print them on 250, 270 and 290 degrees Celsius. These four elements for the layer adhesion are printed on 250 degrees Celsius, but after this they are printed on 270 and on 290 degrees Celsius, which is actually above this recommended printing temperature range. And on 290 I can see a lot of stringing, but this is not the issue of the printer but of the filament. Anyway, the 270 is the maximum recommended printing temperature, but I need some experimenting. You will see this in one of my next videos. And as always with direct extruder, I want to test it with some flexible filament, and this is TPU90 from the Polymaker. Another test project, of course printing hemispheres separately would be a better solution, but I need two objects at once, so follow the stringing. Here you can see that I even use a 0.5 mm retraction with this TPU filament. These are my settings for TPU. I'm very careful with this bed, only 40 degrees Celsius, because it can stick too good to this textured PI. Printing is finished and object is nice and clean. Only a few strings I can see here on the top, but otherwise great printing. And now let's test it. Removing is a little bit tricky, but it's flexible, both the filament and the bed, so it's not so hard. Actually, I'm testing if I can print some bouncy balls, but definitely I think I need some more experimenting. And now final conclusions. This is a great printer, and not only for its price. And first I will mention a few things which I really like with this printer. First of all, it is fast, noticeably faster than SV06. It has bigger nozzles, so this means the filament will be melted even on these higher speeds. It is able to print on 300 degrees Celsius, and it uses 10 mm rods on X, Y and Z axis. It has great flexible bed, sensorless homing, so there are no limit switches, and it has a filament and auto leveling sensor. And there are no springs on the bed, which makes the bed leveling more easier. There is no need for the manual bed leveling because we don't have that leveling knobs anymore. It has thermal insulation on the bed. A few small things like these aligned pins on the bed surface, so it is much easier to place it in the exact same position. And I noticed also that it has a rotating spool holder. From the previous video you saw that I hated those sample filaments without spool, and this time we get 200 grams of sample PLA on the spool. And of course the best is the price. Now a few things which I didn't like, and maybe there are some space for improvements. For example, I'm not sure am I the only one, but Z coordinate on the screen. It is not really accurate. It refreshes after every second layer maybe. So I'm curious if other reviewers will have this issue or it's only me. We will see. This is not really capacitive screen, so it is not like a smartphone. So it requires a little bit more force to be pressed. Maybe a little bit frustrating for younger users who get used using a smartphone. I noticed when I asked my youngest daughter to start some printing with it. I would like to see a little bit better solution on the bed heating cables. I didn't have the problem, but I can see that with a lot of printers and a lot of using, there may be some problems. Sometimes maybe it will stick to the edge of this bottom frame. I'm not sure at this moment, but I saw better solutions for this bed heating cables. And this Sovol slicer, I noticed several bugs during this very short using. So if I would work there and this would be my company, definitely I wouldn't bother to create my own slicer if I wouldn't create it from the scratch, because I would rather concentrate to create correct profiles and finished profiles for latest Ultimaker Cura. And I mean, it would be great if I would upgrade, use latest Ultimaker Cura, just add a new printer and I could see SV06 Plus there. I don't have to wait a year or two until it's added there. I noticed the bed heating is a little bit slow, but actually it has the 500 watt power supply unit, which should be enough. Only the question is what is the power of the bed heater. I can compare this, you can find the page on my website. so you can compare the bed heating time to other printers if this is important for somebody. And I would like to see that they finally move from this small TF card to bigger SD card. It is more comfortable for use. And maybe just one more suggestion for improvement. There's a lot of space on the bottom of this frame, so they could design and create some kind of toolbox which would be very useful with this printer. So this is my experience. Definitely great printer for the price. These small things would be good to be improved, but otherwise highly recommended printer. Even the previous one, the SV06, but this is very similar, even bigger and better. And I'm curious what is others' opinions. So, you know, a few lines in the comment section. Thank you for watching and happy printing.